Thomas, how are you doing? My goodness, look at this. You've got baby Grogu. I can see some feet coming up from the other toy. There we go. Oh no, this is brilliant. The Imperial officer's hat, your Star Wars backdrop. You are a real, actual Star Wars legitimate fan.
I
We
absolutely am. And thank you very much for having me. It's a delight to have you.
I am. So I just watched the Skeleton Crew. I absolutely adored it, and I heard in the news that everyone loves it. Everyone thought it was amazing, the best Star Wars in years, except the viewing figures weren't great. So,
Yeah.
hopefully, and we can encourage enough people who haven't watched it yet to give it a chance. Then the viewing figures will get bolstered, and everyone at Disney will be like, "Oh yeah, we need to make Star Wars that's more like this."
Absolutely. I really hope this will have a slow burn because I think the series was well constructed. It didn't rely on existing characters. It's a whole new story which fit in the Star Wars universe. And it was just a pleasure to see, independent of everything else.
Yeah, I mean that was the thing. It had nothing. It had no Easter egg. Well, I mean, it had Easter eggs, but it didn't
Yeah.
have like, oh look, we've run across Mando, or
Mm.
oh look, it's I don't know, Princess Leia or
Yeah.
something like that. And it was
Yeah, because that's sorry, that's a big problem you can have, right, with some of these IPs that they get too big and they start to crush under their own weight, right? So I haven't watched a lot of the Marvel stuff recently because I haven't watched the other Marvel stuff and it feels like homework to get through.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, I got that. I was even getting that to a certain extent with Star Wars. I have to admit, I
Mm.
haven't watched all of Andor. I hear it's
No,
brilliant.
fair enough. But you don't need to enjoy this, right?
Yeah, this was like a lot of people have compared it to like The Goonies because it was a bunch of kids, and it was a bunch of kids who live in
Yeah.
a suburban world, kind of like ours.
Yes, absolutely. And there's that one-eyed robot which seems quite similar to one of the creatures they come across in the Goonies. There's a ship, not to give spoilers for the Goonies or anything, but yeah, there's a lot to it.
And I loved it. And what I thought was really, really great about it, we watched all the 8 episodes, and the kids went on an adventure and stuff like that. But at the very end, there are like consequences to the story. These kids live in this like,
Mm.
idyllic utopia that is completely separated from the rest of the universe. And at the end, it connects with the universe. And you have to end up
Yeah.
thinking, is this going to be a good thing for the society or a bad thing for the society?
As we must think about our own societies in this globalized world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was thinking that. I mean, what worked so well was there were all these kids, and they were living the ultimate suburban experience, even though it was Star Wars,
Mm.
which I thought was cool. It's like
Yeah,
this is just like the way my kids live, except one of their friends is an elephant, and they're being taught by robots and
yeah,
stuff. And then they go into this
yeah.
big wide world of adventure.
Absolutely, and it's an area of Star Wars we don't normally see. We often see like the Wild West of Star Wars, or we see Coruscant, the city of London or New York of Star Wars. But we've very rarely seen suburbia. The only place I can really think of is actually the Brian Daley novels in the late 70s, which were the Han Solo adventures. So those were one of the few that came across like normal middle class people who get their lives disrupted by all this.
And it's interesting because a lot of what Star Wars is about kind of has metaphors to real life. I mean, wasn't the original trilogy was to do with fashion? Oh, wasn't the original trilogy to do with like imperialism and freedom fighters? So I correct me if I'm wrong, but like the Rebel Alliance was kind of like the Viet Cong, and the Imperials were
Yeah.
kind of like America.
Yes, yes, and that's an interesting point, right? So the Empire was kind of America in Lucas's eyes, and especially corporate America. If you look at his previous film, THX, there's a lot of that angle, and it's worth talking about because a lot of people online will say that the Imperials are all British and the rebels are all American, which you can disprove this by watching the films.
I love.
It's it's one of the other great Star Wars myths, right? That stormtroopers always miss. Well, there is one section which they always miss, and it's the section which they are told to miss.
I never even thought about that. Yeah, because they had to let the Millennium Falcon go. Oh, that's a whole
Yeah.
different.
Because they were
Um,
tracking it, right? So later on, I mean, in Return of the Jedi, they shoot Princess Leia, they shoot R2-D2 twice, they're able to shoot C-3PO. They've got a pretty good hit rate against the minor and supporting characters, and even one of the main characters. So none of them are really safe. All of the main characters do get injured, not necessarily by stormtroopers at some point, but we see them firing with great accuracy right in the opening scene, right when the stormtroopers burst through the Starship corridor.
and slaughter everyone. And then, of course, the prequel trilogies were all about the
Mm.
decline of. I mean, to me, I know it's either the Roman Empire or the rise of fascism in Germany. It's kind of like,
Yeah, yeah.
how do you get
And
this?
that's something that I think with all great fantasy universes is when it's applicable, right? You can apply it to different scenarios, but it's not necessarily this must be that, right? So, the Rebel Alliance doesn't have to be, the Viet Cong against the Americans. Lots of Americans might see it as the American colonists against the British Empire, right? That's an easy go-to for a lot of Americans. But all around the world, you can find kind of similar analogies that people identify with quite strongly.
Absolutely. And to me, Skeleton Crew, the thing that got me was you had this supposedly utopian society that was all run by algorithms. It was run by droids, and people were like doing the great work. And it kind of feels like when you work in corporate America or corporate UK, it's like you're just this small cog in this machine, and you're doing the
Oh
great
yeah.
work, but you're not quite sure where the lack of purpose kind of thing. And you can understand the kids'
Oh, absolutely.
frustrations.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, absolutely. And just for the record, I would absolutely love for my company to be run by some super intelligent computer. I feel it would probably be for the greater good.
Yeah, I never even thought about that. Humans are generally the weakest link in everything, aren't they? So when you were
Yeah,
watching this, what
exactly. Yeah, I've met the bosses. It's true.
when you were watching this, which bits did you just like? I was watching it with my wife, and we had a little bet going about whether Jod was going to be a real Jedi or what his deal was and stuff like that. And I was convinced of the first few episodes that this roguish man they find, I thought he was faking being a Jedi and it was all tricks. But no, it turns out he has the Force, but he wasn't a
Oh,
Jedi. And I like that. It's like this, it was very good because it
mm.
established mysteries that you had to solve. And like, what were you guessing about when you watched it? I,
Okay, so I was guessing the Jude Law character would probably be an Order 66 survivor, that he'd been a child at the Jedi Temple and had somehow survived, which I thought was an easy go-to, but also a bit overdone. We've seen too many survivors of Order 66, so I'm glad that he was not. I'm glad that he had his own unique origin story. And I'm very glad that he wasn't just a clone of, say, Han Solo or Obi-Wan Kenobi. You could say he's a mix of the two, but he's not a clone of a previous character.
no, and he was legitimately morally grey, which was interesting. It's like, okay, he didn't slaughter the kids with a lightsaber, but you felt like if
Mm.
they'd have whined just that one bit more, maybe they would have done.
Yeah, and we do see him, kill adults. There's not a no-kill rule like in 80s American television. He is allowed to kill. And we see him mistreat the kids. Let's put it that way.
And what does it mean? What does this mean to the Star Wars universe that at-attin the old Republic mint? They missed out the Clone Wars entirely, didn't they? They never even knew it happened.
Mm. Yes, yes.
Which is, but what do you think that mean? I mean, is it going to impact the Star Wars universe? Is it going to, I don't know. What does it mean?
We'll see. I mean, one of the big things it means, what is the Star Wars universe, right? So for a long time under George Lucas, this was pretty coherent, and there's all sorts of chinks in the armor you can find, but generally it was very, very coherent. Books, games, video games, all of this stuff all tied together completely. Um, and when Disney took over, they said, no, all of that's out of date. It's just the films, and we'll create our own films and our own stuff. So this series, it does a very, very good job of existing in the two spaces, right? So it works well with the old canon, it works well with the new canon, and I think it's great because it's so original. It's able to exist in the two spaces. So I'd say that's one of the biggest contributions. So what it means is we start to see a more coherent Star Wars.
And one of the things that people have spoken about is the fact that it doesn't have huge viewing figures. Why do you think there are people who haven't
Mm.
watched it, even if they're Star Wars fans?
I would say a bit like when the movie Solo came out. It was heavily affected by the fact that The Last Jedi had just come out and it had lost a lot of fans. It had impacted the saga, so I don't think Solo was so bad. I think it was more The Last Jedi, and also Solo, it was coming out at the time of Avengers Endgame or Infinity War, one of the two, but it was overshadowed by a big release at the time. For Skeleton Crew, it was not as heavily advertised as others. It's coming off the back of the Acolyte, which also turned a lot of fans off. So you didn't have those core supporters of fans promoting it, and I didn't see a lot of noise in the media generally about it.
It's funny. Yeah, the Acolyte was interesting. I didn't hate the Acolyte, but it definitely had problems, which I didn't find in Skeleton Crew. I enjoyed the Skeleton Crew all the way through.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I would say, by the way, that with Skeleton Crew, what it was able to do is it showed a very diverse galaxy, right? It reflects diversity we see in our own societies in a way that didn't get in the way of the story, right? They created
Yes.
the good story first, and it happens to be diverse, you know?
Yeah, I love that. And that's one of the things that I think really let down everybody for a bit was we kept it seemed so inauthentic. And I think the wonderful
Yeah,
thing about the Skeleton Crew was it was an authentic, exciting story. And I don't think I even thought about quote unquote diversity during the entire thing. I was just swept
yeah.
away by the adventure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you could draw easy comparisons to other franchises, right? So for Star Trek, my favorite Star Trek by a long, long way, Star Trek Voyager, it never particularly hit me that the captain was a lady and that the second in command was a Native American or any of that stuff. I just love the characters as they were because they created characters first, and then you get, this aspect, and it's an interesting aspect of them, and it sometimes is explored. It deepens the characters, where they come from, who they are, what they are. But they created that great story first. People have also said the same thing about Disney princesses, right? So especially in the 90s, you've got a Native American princess. You have what is it, The Princess and the Frog?
Yes.
You have a whole range of different ethnicities. People said that Disney did diversity better when it wasn't even trying.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that. Um, so there are going to be. Do you have any friends who are Star Wars fans who haven't watched it yet? I don't know, but I was going to say, how are we going to convince them to watch the Skeleton Crew?
So first of all, I guess the closest Star Wars friends I have watched this, and they actually were pretty happy about it. And I don't know if there'd be promoters. I think one thing I'd really say to a non-Star Wars fan, this is self-contained, right? It's a satisfying beginning, middle, and end. You don't need to watch anything else at all, and it works for both children and adults.
I
So, I
think
mean,
that's
you have kids,
yeah.
right? Did your kids enjoy it?
They don't only. I have one kid who's a loyal Star Wars fan. The other two weren't really that interested, but he loved it, and I
Hmm.
think he saw himself as the kids in it. I saw myself maybe as the dad, as like Wim's dad.
I like that. I mean, to focus on the lead adult, right? Jude Law, when he gave his performance, what I really noticed, he's not acting in a kid's film, right? He's acting as if it's, Shakespeare himself writing, right? He delivers a full-on great performance. And, the child actors, they're child actors,
Yeah, absolutely. And they act very believably as well, which is one of the things when
Hmm.
it's difficult to like put little kids in a situation like this. But I mean, that was one of the when I was growing up reading books about kids going on crazy adventures. I used to read like the not the famous five, what was the other one? There was the two brother and sister who used to go on all sorts of adventures to foreign countries and things. And it was fun and exciting. And it's
I
like
read Jess William.
or Tintin and things like
Hmm,
that, young kids having adventures. And I think
hmm.
to a certain extent these days, society kind of insulates our kids completely.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. I'd say there was a bigger slew of kids going on adventures in fiction, at the very least. I don't feel I can really comment authentically on how childhood has changed, but I did like these kids are very, very protected and they get the shock of the outside world, and I liked that. I feel they portrayed it very, very well,
Yeah,
especially KB actually. For KB the best.
oh, she was a fascinating character as well because she was just slightly off. You know, I have a kid who's on the spectrum. Everyone's talking about like all these different things these days, but it's like she was a very authentic portrayal
Mm,
of a kid who's like a little different, but
yeah,
a little different
absolutely.
that works really well for her in some ways and then is challenging in other ways.
Exactly. So yeah, I really appreciated that, and I think Elephant Boy. has got a fair following as well.
I loved him. Neil, I think his name was, wasn't it? He
Yeah.
was just wonderful in the entire thing. And I honestly, one of the exciting things was I genuinely felt that the kids were in peril. I didn't think that like any of the
Mm,
kids were going to die, but I was like, oh, this is the kids are in a dangerous situation now. They're really way out of their depth.
mm.
And so it was
Yeah,
interesting.
it worked for me. I mean, in the way of, in 1980s movies, right, which, is a big era for Star Wars, even though it started in the 70s, 80s is a big era for Star Wars. At that time, right, you've got Stallone, Schwarzenegger, you've got all these muscle-bound heroes, Jean-Claude Van Damme, who can smash through anything. And what I really like is Roger Moore, who's in his 50s, like, because when he clings on to like that fire engine going through America, right, you genuinely fear for the man.
Yeah, and he is that
He's a,
great whale who is like, whoa!
oh!
Yeah.
Exactly. So I love that peril more than, smashing through everything. So I feel for the kids in this show. You kind of have that. They're clinging on for dear life, and that always gets me.
Yeah, I mean, people talk about a coming of age adventure. One of the things I enjoyed about it was, the kids get separated from adults and they clump
Mm.
onto an adult who then betrays them, and then they clump onto the robot who, I think SG-33, SM-33, what's his
The
SSM-33, I think.
robot.
He's a wonderful character, but like they can't
Yeah.
quite trust him because of the way he's programmed and stuff. And it's a coming of age story because there is a point where every kid has to realize that they can't necessarily rely on the adults in the world and they have to rely on themselves. And I just thought that was done
Mm.
beautifully. And the very end,
Yeah.
where they all run off and do their things, like Neil goes off and shoots a big turbo
Mm.
laser, and KB flies the ship and lands, and Wim and Fern are fighting. The Jord at the
Yeah.
climax. I mean, it really works that all of the kids discover the skills they had inside of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of these developments, they're seeded throughout all the previous episodes, right? There's no rabbit out of a hat. It all comes from somewhere.
Yes, and that's one of the things we talk about in authenticity and
Mm.
diversity and stuff. There's always we need to have a quote unquote
Yeah.
strong female character, and it's like let's just have a regular character, and for some reason she knows karate, and for some reason she's great at this. Like that didn't happen. All of the
Yeah.
kids they had their skills and they went through something. There was a character arc, and when they ended up
Yeah.
being triumphant and doing great stuff, it's you felt like they'd earned it.
Exactly. And I'd say that, you identified with the dad. For me, I rarely notice that I mean, he has a moment, full spoilers. He has a moment in the final episode where he could just be heroic. And he kind of steps back from it and he needs a few goes to get to it. And it's like, well, yeah, because he's struggling with he's not actually been in this situation before. And so it felt so much more heartfelt that you see that struggle.
Yes. And I thought there was that great scene with the parents where they had to sneakily try and send off a signal outside of the barrier. And it's kind of, can you imagine doing that at your job, your day job, like
Mm.
being forced to do conformity is something that was sort of bred into everyone who was living on that planet, and they have to be rebels in their own way.
Hmm.
And rebellion doesn't always come to everybody. We're not all complete rogues. You and I, maybe.
Of course, of course. But when you've got that habit, right? You've got the habit of following the rules. So it's the breaking of the habit, especially for the adults. It's
That's yeah. So I would definitely recommend this as a show for I think what you mentioned it was because it's self-contained, even if you're not necessarily a Star Wars fan. If you just want to watch something that's fun or something with the kids, it would be really enjoyable just to sit down and watch because
mm.
it's got spaceships and robots, but it's not you don't need to have this all of this Star Wars lore to fully understand it. But if you do, then it makes a lot of sense.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So there's a lot of deaths. There's a lot of kind of creatures returning, including characters who were removed from the films and special editions, and they've kind of been brought back. So there's a lot of that kind of thing going on. If you're deep into it, a bit like The Simpsons, right? The Simpsons at its height was really good at getting cultural references, which if you knew it, added a lot. But if you didn't know it, it did not detract.
Like the first mate being the dog creature or the werewolf creature, and I was like, "That's the guy from the canteen." And didn't they remove him in the special edition or something of the first Star Wars movie? But I recognized
Hmm.
him, and it made me feel like a kid again because I remember
That's
seeing
right.
that
Yeah.
scene for the first time,
Yeah.
and I just noticed you've got a
Exactly. Yes. Yeah, I've got that Star Wars figure of him. And
and what other and the you know
so you just noticed?
I just noticed your Sand Raider mask that you've got down there.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I made him.
You made that. Sorry, I mean this is totally ADHD
I've got.
where I'm getting
Yeah. Yeah.
completely
I made
distracted
that.
by
I
all
mean,
these
a
things.
decade ago or more. Whereas this one is from the shops, I'm afraid. This is.
No, that's I would have to go to my kid's room and get his Boba Fett helmet. But you also got the little robot that Princess Leia had. Is that the little red and white robot? Is that the one that Princess Leia had in Obi-Wan?
That's right. Yep. So this is.
That is brilliant.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So this is the robot that she has.
All your cool stuff has completely derailed my Oh my God, this little head twists like that. Sorry, I got completely distracted by all of your cool things, but
Yeah.
um
I
that
am a big Star Wars fan, I'll admit.
so what's next in Star Wars?
That's actually a good question because we're not quite sure. So we don't know if there's going to be a season two for this. It's got a clear beginning, middle, and end. It's not been confirmed whether there will be. There are some reports, I'd say unconfirmed, that this might have been intended as a movie originally, and then it was turned into a TV series. If that's true, then that's the same story as the Obi-Wan movie. Sorry,
Yeah,
the Obi-Wan series. The Obi-Wan movie was turned into a series. Now, I would say with radically different results. Um, so I think the Obi-Wan series is much better when you see it cut down to a movie. Whereas Skeleton felt rushed and condensed if it was a movie. So if you want to see what's next in Star Wars, maybe the best thing is to look at all the movie announcements and see which of those could kind of be cannibalized into a TV show.
that's interesting. The next one is Grogu and oh, what is it? The Mandalorian and Grogu, isn't it?
Yeah, potentially we have that as a movie, and we've also got Ahsoka season two coming, and we expect them to be intertwined somehow. So then we do expect a bit of synergy and a bit of overlap.
Now, the Skeleton Crew also takes place at the same time, doesn't it? As yeah, the Skeleton Crew takes place at the same time as the Mandalorian and as Ahsoka. Is that right?
Hmm.
So maybe what happened in the Skeleton
Yeah,
Crew.
so all of these take place around 5, 6 years after Return of the Jedi.
So maybe the impact of what happened in the Skeleton Crew of this planet being discovered and stuff like that. Maybe that's going to be something that gets mentioned in the movie and the next series of Ahsoka.
Yeah, entirely possible, especially if Thrawn is coming back to the galaxy and he discovers these special planets. I can see a lot of potential there.
That's and what is it? The nine different planets or the eight different planets, and all of the rest have been destroyed except at-attin. There we go. There's quite a delay between our
Yeah.
things, isn't there? I apologize for that. Everyone's going to be watching, being like, "Oh wow, Thomas is really thinking about this answer."
Sorry, there's sometimes delays in the connection, so I hope this is flowing well for you. Yeah, so so there are a series of planets, some of which I think we've seen a couple of them that have been destroyed. So I don't know how many are left.
Completely my ADHD going off again. One of the things I thought that was really interesting was there were the Old Republic credits. There we go. Wim's dad gave him a
Mhm.
bunch of them and said, This is going to be enough for this week or something." And then when he goes off and
Yeah.
goes to the planet, this is an enormous amount of wealth. And a single credit is like a ridiculous amount of money. I kind of like that because again, it
Mhm.
was kind of a metaphor for like the real life. When I went to India, for
Yeah.
example, $5 in American money you don't think is very much, but you could.
Mm.
I remember I went out and bought like a crate of beer with that just because the wealth disparity is so different, and it's so interesting to see that in the Star Wars world.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So it's not the first time we've seen Republic credits, right? So we see Qui-Gon Jinn handle Republic deck diaries that aren't accepted on Tatooine. So there we see the current season even accepted. Whereas by this period of time, the underworld of Star Wars has, locked onto these as super valuable, rare items that are desirable.
Love that. So, oh, I don't know. Okay, final verdict as we wrap it up. How are we going to get more people to watch this? What is the message that I can
I
get down into
honestly
it?
think, I've I've heard I've heard this described as the Goonies in space, and actually I think that's a very fair description of it. I think it's something that will pull in a lot of people. The Goonies has a bit of a following by itself. But I think just really saying this is a really independent series. It works by itself. It's only what six, it's a small number of episodes. And they're not very long.
No, I kind of like that as well because I'm a busy. I can commit to like one television show a week, and so the this was perfect. It was like 1 hour a week, or and it wasn't even an hour. Some of them were like 20 minutes, some of them I
Yeah,
think 30 minutes, and it was like a good chunk
yeah.
and satisfying. And then it always left on a cliffhanger, so it was a really enjoyable watching experience.
Yeah. Absolutely. And isn't it interesting, right? So we've now got these big American TV shows that really do what used to be the British model, right, of TV shows where you've got like clear beginning, middle, and end, only a few episodes, all by the same writer, whereas, 20, 30 years ago, America was churning out, 20 episodes a season, and it was a big writing room and all that. And that model is just completely gone.
That's so interesting because yeah, I like Star Trek as well, and I've been watching some Star Trek, and they would do
Mm.
22 episodes a season, and now it's like
Yeah.
10. And I
Yeah, yeah, I've just finished watching all of Voyager again, so all 170 odd episodes, and it took me a fair while to get through it. But that's 7 seasons, right? So anything that's 7 seasons now, you could battle through pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think it's enjoyable because you get to the end quicker. I don't think I've ever felt really shortchanged by any of these shortest seasons. And I guess if you have a series that's 10
Mm,
episodes as opposed to 22, you can have a lot more budget, if nothing
mm.
else.
Absolutely, absolutely. The only thing you can sometimes lack is, focus and development of minor characters. That's not always a brilliant thing, and sometimes the filler episodes. There are a few shows, Voyager is the first one that comes to mind again, because I've mentioned it a few times, where some of the filler episodes are actually brilliant. And it was, and Filoni asked his animators to stop referring to certain episodes as the filler episodes. He's like, no, no, these are character development episodes and stuff. So sometimes you get it, but yeah, with these major landmark series that cost millions, right? So this whole series is well over $100 million in cost. Yeah, you do get very satisfying story that you can just belt through.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I'll tell you what, we will wrap this up because the internet connection isn't great. But thank you, and I don't want to anyone to not enjoy listening to this, but thank you so much for taking the time to
Oh,
speak to
thank
me
you.
about it because yeah, it's like you I've got David Zaritsky's going to talk to me about it as well because he's a huge Star Wars fan as well. And then we have Baby Grogu looking there. But
Always happy to talk about Star Wars.
my mission is to get as many people who haven't seen it as yet to watch the Skeleton Crew because I just think it is brilliant. And I think if we
Yeah.
can convince more people to watch it, then hopefully the folks at Disney will be like, this is what we need to make more of.
Yeah, yeah, because I really like it's an original, right? They've struck out on their own. They've done something really original, and let's reward that, right? We don't want rehashes, we don't want remakes, we don't want, we don't want the same meal again and again and again. We want original stuff, and this fits.
And I think also everyone is always so negative on the internet. And
Oh yeah,
I know everyone was
yeah,
complaining all the time about the acolytes, and I just got to the point where it's like I want to enjoy something. I want to listen to the internet and people talking
yeah.
about how much they enjoyed something about how instead of how terrible they think it is. And this is a legitimate,
Oh,
enjoyable
absolutely.
series.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Well, Thomas, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to stop recording now and get this out there. But you are a gentleman for taking the time to speak to me, and hopefully we can convince one or two people to watch the Skeleton Crew. If you are listening to this and you decide to watch the Skeleton Crew because of Thomas, let us know in the comment section down below. And yeah, I will buy him a pint for every single person who leaves a comment that says that they watch the Skeleton Crew because of this. So there we go. Next time I'm in England, hopefully it will be, yeah, you will die from alcohol poisoning. Anyway, thank you so much, Thomas. Ciao.